Tim.
Tebo.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Welcome to Life and Leadership, conversations around all things. Life and leadership. Tim, it's January 2022. What's on your heart?
Well, I always find start of a year kind of exciting, looking ahead, what's to come. I mean, we're obviously starting a year off the back of nearly 2 years of so much disruption and challenge with COVID and this pandemic, and the world feels like it gets crazier and crazier. And so you're kind of looking ahead, and it's almost hard to know exactly what to expect. I think that's what we've learned in terms of leading. You're having to lead in these extraordinary times of such change, seismic change and shifts. And so I'm almost slightly nervous to put in too many concrete plans. I mean, we've got lots going on as a church, which is really exciting. We're planting churches. We're setting up a new location in another part of the city. We feel God's given us some really exciting dreams. So I feel really expectant, really hungry for God to do something amazing. I think for me, the thing I long to be a part of is something, a move of God, which you stand back and think only God could do that. You know, that wasn't just a few good ideas, great people working really hard on something. That was something divine, something of God that you look back and think, wow. And I think to lead and to lean into those things involves risk. It involves prayer, faith. And so as I kind of sort of lean into 2022, that's what I'm praying for. God, may I be a risk taker. May I lean not on my own understanding. May I step out in faith. May I be attentive to what you're doing. May I be effective at working with friends and people in terms of discerning together. Because again, I think God's given us such a strong team here, and great leaders are amazing at working with people and actually together discerning what God is doing. So I feel really, really excited and expectant. I mean, on a personal level, I really want to get better at golf.
Okay.
Because I think I've been thinking a bit more about just certain things that I can do that are outlets that just a bit more for me.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's been crazy intense the last little while. And I want to be leading well for decades to come. And so to do that, you've got to make sure there's things in your life that are fun, that you switch off from the intensity and the pressure. So for me, my hope for 2022, hole in one, and then I get a whole much better at golf.
And do you have goals? Do you set goals? Is that your thing at the start of a new year?
I ebb and flow. Previous years I have. This year, it's funny, I was actually reflecting. So 2021, I did write a whole bunch of goals and was reading them and encouraged, a whole bunch were met, and obviously some weren't. I think I'm battling almost to imagine what the future is going to look like. This thing called Strength Finders, where it lists your sort of top 5 strengths, and actually one of mine is futuristic. So I live my life constantly imagining what the future is going to be, which means sometimes the present can feel frustrating. But actually, and I think it's a bit of a God thing, I struggle to even comprehend what will Gas Street, what will Birmingham, what will my life look like in 5 years' time. And I wonder if God's just don't worry about all of that. Just focus on me. Just run with what's in your hands. Go with what's in your heart. And just see what begins to unfold. So I'm kind of just focusing a bit more on the present at the moment, which is unusual for me.
Yeah, and speaking of 2021, what was perhaps your high in leadership?
Wow. Well, there was actually so much that I was really thrilled with, encouraged by. I think probably the high was just so proud of seeing our team and our church just adapt to everything with the pandemic, and actually in a stage where so many movements and organizations, businesses, churches were really struggling. I feel in some ways we had one of our most fruitful, effective years in terms of reaching unchurched, in terms of serving the needs of our city. You know, we've launched this thing in partnership with loads of other churches in the UK called Love Your Neighbour, and we're just seeing one of our church buildings full throughout the week of people in our community coming for food and coming for counseling and advice around money. And you know, in one sense it's tragic to see the depth of need around us, but so exhilarating to see our church and our people step up and connect. Seeing some of the ministries go way beyond what we've seen before. And the most thrilling thing for me and Rach, my wife, is just seeing all the people, the team, the staff involved, watching them step out, step up, muddle through the pressures and the stress. And I just feel so proud of our team. And I feel so thrilled and excited with what we've seen, what God's done, and just so grateful. So I think as a leader, that was my highlight, just seeing us step out in a time of real challenge and see God do something beautiful.
Yeah, and I want to come back to staff and team in a moment. And I know you won't mind me asking you this, but if you could share, what was perhaps your low of the last season?
Yeah, I think for me, and there were definitely some lows, it was probably times everything felt really mundane. And, you know, I'm creative, I love travel. You know, from a young age, I've had the joy of traveling over the world, meeting new people, seeing different things. And so for the last 18 months, you know, I haven't been on a plane, which would just be unusual for me. So actually, and what those trips do is they feed me, they spark ideas, you meet amazing people. It's brilliant. And so I think I found just sometimes the kind of day in, day out, at times same old, sometimes a bit the kind of the grind of getting some of these things up and running. Times hard. And I remember Louis Giglio leads an amazing movement in America, Passion, when he was about to plant a church. So he led this incredible student movement, and he was going to actually start a kind of incarnational church in Atlanta. And so when we were about to come here to start Gas Street, Rach and I had dinner with him, and he was such helpful advice, but he said, you know, the thing about leadership, and he used a kind of NFL, American football analogy, which I don't fully understand American football, but basically he said you have the quarterback who will throw touchline pass, you know, a 40-yard spiral pass, you know, it's caught, everyone goes crazy. And he said, you know, going to a conference, doing a great talk, in my case, leading a set of worship, can feel like those quarterback moments. You come back exhilarated, high fives, woo. But church leadership, he said, it's like being in the kind of the defense. It's the blocking, tackling. It's kind of tough. It's painful. It's relentless. You don't feel like you're running fast. You don't get those high moments. And I think a lot of church leadership is a bit like that. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit like parenting. There's just so much, just being consistent, being kind, being present, navigating issues, not pouring fuel on the fires when fires are happening, you know, just being calm, being faithful. And I think that's what we've had to really do. And so it's probably been really good for me, but at times I've found that hard. Yeah. And then when you start to feel a bit, am I feeling a bit bored here? The danger of trying to find escapes elsewhere. Whereas actually this has been a really good season to be very present, to be very invested, and to meet God and experience him in the ordinary. Because again, I think in leadership, you know, we have our heroes and we read the books and we watch the documentaries and podcasts. and you get the highlights reel.
Yeah.
And so we're in danger of aspiring for those highlights to be the norm. But that's not reality. The reality is it's just being in a community, being humble, growing, getting up in the morning, getting about your business, and being faithful. And God blesses those decisions, doesn't he, over a period of time, and you suddenly see these amazing moments where God breaks through. But actually, there's so much beauty in the normality of the everyday.
Yeah, well, there's such a tension in leadership, and you've just described it and articulated it so well there, whereby, as leaders, we're visionaries, we're desiring for things, and we're praying and we're believing God is speaking to us about what he wants to do. Often, as you've said, long before it actually happens, you're talking about how, you think about the future, 5-10 years, and we do, and I wonder, how do you go about managing that tension between, what you desire for, maybe even, as a leader, but also personally. There'll be people, listening and watching in who are really desiring for God to do something, or just personally, maybe in business, maybe in their career, or whatever it is. How do you manage that? This desire, and then just stewarding what is already in your hand.
It's really good. I think. There's something about being a leader where you need to maintain almost a sense of naivety, a kind of just this dreamer that God can do something extraordinary. I mean, we've been in Birmingham now, coming up to 6 years, and I don't think I'd have been able to sustain it, just even that period, without having this, I just believe we're going to see this moment happen. I believe we're going to see this transformation, these breakthroughs. I believe we're going to see God do some extraordinary things. And we've seen moments and seen things that have really encouraged me, blown me away. But for me, there's so much more to come. And so you need to hold that kind of, this is what God's called us to. This is what we're about. Big thinking, the dreams that you almost be too vulnerable to share with certain people, and you need to hold on to that, but you also need to understand the reality of our ego, the insecurities within us to prove ourselves to others. Do I want, the whole thing about ambitions, I think interesting, because I think godly ambition is really important, but then where does ambition actually, I want this to be amazing so that I can prove that I'm a great leader and that look at me, love me, all of that stuff, which is, if we're honest, in most of us. And so I think part of holding the tension between big thinking, dreaming for more, is also being grounded in a community where we can be ourselves, where people can ask the hard questions, where you humble yourself, you sacrifice for the sake of others, and you discern together. And actually you learn to embrace the ordinariness of life as well. And so I see some leaders who I feel like there's perhaps disappointment, which is such an important part of leadership, managing disappointment, because big visionaries live in a state of permanent disappointment, because it was never quite what you hoped for. But actually, so for me, acknowledging and recognizing those disappointments, being honest with key people in my life about navigating those, bringing them before God, learning not to find my worth and identity in the success or the failure of a particular initiative is really, really important. And so I think for me, it's a lot is outworked in prayer and worship, in terms of trying to test my heart, but also it's outworked with, I think particularly with my wife Rachel, who can ask the really uncomfortable questions. I think that's been really important to keep a sense of grounding. So you can sustain the call God has on your life.
Yeah, it's awesome. One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, and one of the things I respect about you the most, and also just what you're teaching me in this season, and something that we talk about around here a lot, is vulnerability.
Yeah.
you know, and I've just been so fascinated by the way that you lead. You know, you lead and you teach in a very transparent way. You know, sometimes you say things and I'm like, whoa, you know, but you know what? It's so powerful and it's refreshing, you know, and you hardly see that in leadership. You hardly see, you know, the old saying is, you know, leading with a limp, you know, but you know, you don't shy away from that. You welcome that, you embrace that. And I wonder, you know, what's your revelation on that? What is, you know, what's the value of vulnerability in leadership, especially, you know, today?
I think vulnerability connects people, and it's a way of sort of drawing everyone in and everyone up. You know, someone once said that you might impress people with your strength, but you'll connect with them with your vulnerabilities. I also think we live in a time where the amount of distrust towards leaders is an all-time high. You know, we're seeing this in the UK, but you look at America, you look at all over the world. And I think, and also within the church, all these podcasts which are going viral and stories of these leaders who just gave across to such brash kind of confident, follow me, I'm the, you know, and then it all goes horribly wrong. And I think, firstly, my revelation is the model of Jesus' leadership, who, the more I study and reflect, it was so countercultural. It was so against anything that anyone would have expected. You know, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, were waiting for a Messiah who they met, you know, military figure riding on a white horse, strong, confident, overthrowing the oppressor. At that time, it had been the Roman Empire, leading the people into everlasting life. You know, where the people of Israel would rule and reign with this Messiah. They had this person in their mind. And then Jesus is a carpenter, and he's eating with tax collectors and prostitutes, and he's weeping at funerals, and he's being beaten and crucified, and it just is completely against everything that people would have expected. And I love the humanity, the vulnerability of Jesus. And what did that do? It drew people in. And he managed to hold together all types of people. He managed to welcome those who were living lives that were far away from the heart, the plan, the will of God, and yet drew them in and inspired them and empowered them, and by the Spirit of God released them to change, to become Christ-like. And so I think that model of Jesus is so key for me. I also think, if I look at the leaders who've influenced me, my parents, mum and dad, and I think of Mike Pilavarchi, Nicky Gumbel, you know, they demonstrated this real vulnerability and humility that was so inspiring. And so I think in leadership, there's this corrupt way of thinking that if people see your vulnerabilities, if they see your weaknesses, they'll think, oh my goodness, can't trust Tim. Tim doesn't have what it takes. I need a leader who's going to just tell me exactly what to do. And so we try and push away the questions, the doubts, hide away our imperfections. But actually what it does is it disconnects us from everyone else. I remember there's a real key transformational moment for my leadership where about 2 years into leading Gastry, basically I had a bit of a crash. I think I was exhausted, stressed. I was kind of dizzy. And, you know, initially I thought I had a brain tumor. You know, I was planning my funeral. Is it? Game over. And then, you know, realized it was stress. Did a bunch of counseling. But there was a key moment where Rach said, you've got to gather some of the leaders from church just to let them know what's going on. I was like, no, I can't. And I really resisted it. And I realized the reason I was resisting it because of pride, but also because I was worried that if they saw that I was struggling, they'd be thinking, Tim's not up to it. You know, gosh, what are we going to do? But, you know, eventually I gave in to Rach, invited these guys round, and we sat down, and I said, I just need to be honest, I'm battling here, struggling, just talk through some of the the journey, the things going on, and I hated it. I felt embarrassed, felt uncomfortable. But actually, I'll never forget the response. Firstly, Tim was so sorry, you're feeling it, we had no idea. We're with you, we're for you. They set up a group where one of them prays for me every day. They got around me, they prayed over me, they stood with me. And rather than feeling I'd alienated people or I'd been caught out, I'm not a good enough leader, I felt empowered. I felt strengthened. I thought, I'm not alone. And these guys lent in more. And suddenly, rather than one person trying to do it, the whole team begins to emerge. And so I actually think the antidote to so much of what we're seeing in terms of just distasteful, abusive, unhealthy patterns of leadership in the church is vulnerability. Again, I've had the privilege of getting alongside some of these key leaders. And I think if I'm really honest, one of the things I've found, the level of chaos and insecurity and ego and politics, it's just deeply disillusioning. And I think what people will respond to is someone to say, look, this is me. I'm not perfect. This is what I feel. I want to work with others. I want to be honest. I believe in a God who can do the miraculous. I'm also aware of my human frailties, and why don't we go on this journey together? It's hard. It's scary to do that, but I think it's the way forward, and it's what I think will build trust with people who've been hurt by other leaders in the past.
Yeah, wow. Vulnerability builds trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so strong. And you just mentioned there insecurity, in leadership. And one thing I've observed, having had the privilege of working fairly closely with you, is a certain level of security in your leadership. And my evidence of that is how releasing I find you are, and the culture is that that you've built, and I've found that just to be, again, just so interesting. And I want to ask you, how does giving people space, how does that contribute to what we do and how we build, whether that is church or whether that's family or business? You're a parent, you've got 5 kids now, and how are you, how does that contribute to what you do?
Well, I think as a leader, you've got to understand what your particular gifts, strengths are. I mean, growing up, I always remember I began to observe the things I enjoyed most were being part of a team. I mean, when it came to sport, I had to be a winning team. But I loved that thrill of being in it together, the adventure of what was going to happen, the kind of, we didn't win there, or we did there. And I think something triggered in my mind that actually that's where I come alive, being in a team. That's why when with Leading Worship I had the opportunity to go kind of do my own thing and do American travel. But I was like, I'm a part of this family at Soul Survivor in Watford, and why would I leave that? That's the thrill of being part of a team. So that was so life-giving for me. And so I think that's one of the things I enjoy most is building team and releasing team. And for team to work, it has to mean everyone has a part to play. And the team flourishes most when everyone is released to bring the best of themselves. Again, I think I have had that modeled really well from leaders I've served under. I think maybe the way I was parented, I think I'd probably do feel fairly comfortable in my own skin. I love being around strong characters. And so I think that means that's perhaps enabled me to stronger characters to be comfortable around me, and I'm up for letting them fly. I guess I've had to grow in confidence of when to challenge, when to speak in, when to say, right, actually, this is the vision, this is where we're going, wanting to be free, but also needs to be part of serving what we're doing here. I think, of course, there are challenges in that, because if you sort of release everyone to hairs running everywhere, it can be completely chaotic. But it's when you just when to pull in. But I think great leaders, if they're going to be controlled, you'll never get the best of them, and they'll leave. And so actually, I guess for me, I love and I find such joy in seeing another leader absolutely ace it. Yeah. And so I think that's maybe how I'm wired. And so it feels more comfortable. But it's challenging. There are different challenges, you know, when you've got strong leaders around you, but confrontation amongst one another, which also is a healthy thing. If a team has no confrontation, no pushback, then that's not going to be a healthy team, because you're grappling with, you're trying to figure something out together. But actually, the excitement of that conversation, those different opinions, the different styles, I think leads to something much more beautiful.
Yeah, and speaking of team, you know, I feel like the team is incredible, you know, and I'm interested in how do you go about your structure? What are you looking for when you're building team? What are some of the things that for you're thinking this is what I need, whether that's character wise or you know, in whatever sense, you know, how should we be thinking about this year, the future, maybe leaders in industry? How, you know, what advice would you give?
I think it's important, you know, who does God put around you and who suddenly comes to your attention? I'm probably less. I mean, there are times where I'm like, okay, there's a gap here. We really need to find someone who can fill that gap. That happens occasionally. More often I'll be with someone, connecting with someone, there's a gut feeling. Like I think the first time I met you, I mean, years ago now probably, isn't it? But I remember saying to my wife, Rach, I'd love to work with Tebo. I think it was almost like I felt there was something there that I could see in you, that I felt like you could really bring to us, and you kind of hold it lightly, and then, you know, God opened up a door and a way. And I can think of other people who, you know, just, I guess you connect with, and then you suddenly think, oh my goodness, there's something on them. So I guess I'm probably looking more at the person rather than looking at the role.
Right.
Because that's what excites me. The people. I think probably I have a bit of a less fixed, this is how it's going to look by this time in the year, and therefore we need that to make it happen. I'm more like, I love that person. I see something on them. I feel like I could play a part to encourage and release them, and slightly would trust that it'll all come together. Now, that sounds a little bit sort of pie in the sky, because also you do need to, how does everyone connect and work together? And some of those detailed things aren't always my strong point, but you make it work. But so as a leader, I'd say if there's someone around you that you're connecting with, you just sense there's something on them, take a risk, go for it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Has the pandemic shaped your leadership in any way?
I think it's made me bolder. I think it's put a greater level of urgency. I think, you know, you're just aware the world can change in a moment. And that's particularly, you know, those first few weeks of the pandemic, you're like, oh my goodness, where's this going? You know, and so I'm like, go big or go home. And that's where I feel, and just seeing God respond to our faith as a church and stepping out, and actually at a time where so many are trying to consolidate and rebuild, we've been expanding. Now, I don't think every church expands every year after year. You know, there's different rhythms throughout the year, but this has been a moment of growth for us, and so I feel this is a time just to be really, really bold. Again, the lies of the culture. So many Christians are just sleepwalking their way to kind of death or just to kind of nothingness. And we've got to be bold in saying Jesus is the way. You know, that the world is full of all these lies that are confusing us. And we need to get stuck into the Word of God. We need to be committed and convinced that Jesus has a plan, that God, He wants to use us. And let's call people into this amazing adventure of following Jesus and seeing him transform situations, transform organizations, transform cities and nations. So I feel like I've definitely got more bold as I've moved forward.
Yeah. And final question, just looking, at the last 2 years, just how hectic it's been. What do you think that the church should be focusing on right now? What should we be drawing our attention on, the church, capital C, across our nation, across the world? In your mind, what is the focus now?
I think the church has to take risks. And I think the church has to grow in confidence of who it is we're serving and following. I feel I've seen a whole movement within the church where, and there's been so much life and blessing in it, but wow, look at the excellence with which things have done, the filming of this or production of that or the quality of that communicator or that speaker, that's great. But actually, to really see complete transformation, it's a move of the Spirit of God. And that doesn't come about by God waiting for one amazing preacher or some incredible singer-songwriter. It's the people of God taking seriously the call of God to surrender everything and to follow him, to be obedient, but also to believe that the same Spirit that raised Jesus Christ from the grave lives in us. And so I think the church just needs to move from this kind of it's tough times, we're on the decline, how are we going to do this? How to think, come on, let's mobilize people. So one of the things we're thinking about is how do we better mobilize the business community in our church, who are leading teams, working in organizations, navigating massive HR, ethical issues. How do we, for them to be kingdom carriers so that they're going in, not just how can we earn money or how can I navigate this situation, but how can I bring the presence of Jesus Christ, the hope of the world, into this meeting, into this staff team, into this organization. And so I think that's what we need. We need to be fully committed, praying like crazy for a move of God and just confident that he can do it, God can do it. So that would be my thing of what I'd love to see the church lean into.
Amazing. Hey, well, thanks for your time. I'd love you to pray.
Yeah.
Pray for leaders at this time. I'd love for us just to exalt some leaders and just lift them up in prayer. And then the church as well, that this would just be such a good year and just anything else that's on your heart.
Yeah. No, do it. Hey, Lord, we thank you. Your word says, Jesus, that you will build the church. You say, I will build the church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Lord, I thank you that you're not calling me or Tebo or anyone else watching this to be the Messiah, to build the church. You've come, you're doing that. But you invite us into the adventure, the partnership, the joy of being a part of seeing your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. And so, Lord, I pray for leaders now who are weary and are tired, who are burdened, who it's a challenging time moving forward. Lord, I pray that you'd encourage them, you'd speak to them. Lord, I pray for leaders who are just longing for breakthroughs, who are desperate to see a shift happening in the things that they're doing, in the teams that they're leading, in their resourcing and finances. Lord, I just pray that you would begin to open up amazing miracles in their lives. Lord, I pray that you'd begin to disrupt them and speak to them in their dreams, provide prophetic voices who will just begin to open their eyes to see that there is more, that you're at work, that the kingdom is at hand. And Lord, I pray for boldness on leaders in the church. Lord, I pray for your bride of Christ to rise up, Lord, that we'd hear more and more stories throughout the UK of just different types, denominations, sizes, kind of churches and communities, just seeing beautiful things happening. Lord, I thank you for the way your church has stood up and served the community, this nation, throughout this pandemic. So many churches on the front line of serving those in need. But Lord, I pray that as we've served those in need, we'd begin to see a great harvest of lost sons and daughters returning home, discovering the love of a father. I pray all this in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.